Tonight, I'm going to show you how I planned out and wired up my whole shop. This entire garage only has about 3 outlets in it, and I'm going to need much more than that for just my shop alone. Maybe if you just park cars in the garage, you only need 3 outlets, but for my tools, I'm going to need a bunch of new circuits, which means I'm probably going to need a new sub panel, and I need to create an electrical plan. First of all though, before I lay out my plan, I have a couple of guidelines that I'm going to be following, which you may want to consider if you're doing this yourself. The first one is alternate circuits for neighboring outlets. What this means is that no outlet is on the same circuit as the one next to it. This is going to make it so you can plug in tools and shop vacs right next to each other and not have to worry about tripping the breaker. If you want to get really extreme with this, you can put 2 outlets in the same box and have one on one circuit and one on another circuit. The next one is to put your shop outlets at about 48 inches off the ground. What this does is makes it so that it's a lot easier to plug and unplug things and you don't have to crawl underneath tools to get to them. I do have a few outlets that I have intentionally down lower, but for the most part, all of my outlets are at 48 inches on either side of the shop. Make sure all your outlet circuits are 20 amp circuits. The only reason you should be installing a 15 amp circuit in your shop is probably for your lighting. The wire does cost a bit more to make it a 20 amp circuit, but that extra 5 amps just gives you a little bit more buffer so that you're less likely again to trip a breaker. The next one is to make every 110 volt outlet a double outlet. I learned this the hard way in my last shop when I had 3 different outlets that I had to expand at different times because I didn't have enough outlets for the plugs that I needed to go there. Just make them all doubles. The next one is don't forget to add ceiling outlets for things like power drops, air filtration systems, and garage door openers. And finally, if you're not sure if you need an outlet in that spot, just put one there. It's going to be a lot easier now than trying to put it in later. Now with all these tips in mind, I started laying out my electrical plan considering all the tools that I have and the tool layout that I did in a previous video. My main electrical panel is about 20 feet from where my shop is, so I decided to just run a service entrance cable from my main panel to the sub panel, and then bring all the circuits from the shop to that sub panel. That made all the individual circuit runs a lot shorter because they didn't have to run the additional 20 feet back to where the main panel is. Once I laid out the location of each individual outlet, I then divided those up between 4 different circuits to make sure that I didn't have any ones that were next to each other on the same circuit. I also included 2 220 volt circuits for my table saw, my bandsaw, and hopefully a dust collector someday. This is my attempt to future-proof the shop. For some reason in this house, they put in these 7-foot tall garage doors, which means that the garage door opener is 7 feet up from the floor, hanging in the middle of my shop. I think this is gonna get annoying real quick, so I would like to put in one of the side garage door openers that you can mount on the wall and get rid of this track altogether. In order to plan for that, I'm putting an outlet up in the corner, which is above where that garage door opener would go. I'm also adding an outlet for a power drop, which I may or may not use. I just want to have options. All right, now that the plan is finished, let's get to work. The first thing I do is place all my boxes so I know where everything's going. Once those are in place, I run the wire from the farthest box away on the circuit back to each one until I reach the sub panel. Running the wire around the shop got a little bit tricky and I had to get into some pretty uncomfortable positions, but I also had some friends get into uncomfortable positions. Eventually though, we got it all in place. Once the wire was run to all the boxes, it was time to hook everything up. For some of my wiring, I used the traditional wire nuts, but for others, when it got more complicated in the box, I used these new connectors called Wago. And these connectors have a little lever that opens and closes and locks in the wires. These are really slick, easy to install, and surprisingly strong. If you've never tried doing electrical work, it's not as hard as you might think, and there's a lot of online resources out there that can help you, like YouTube. I've also found it really helpful to have a few electrician friends that you can reach out to and ask questions when the internet is a little bit unclear on what the answer is. However, if you still don't feel safe with some aspects of the electrical, don't hesitate to hire somebody to do the scary stuff. Now, for the outlet circuits, it's really important that you put a GFCI on the first outlet from the box. This will help protect the rest of the outlets on that line and make it so you don't have to put a GFCI on every single outlet. Another feature that I want to have in my shop is I want to be able to turn the air compressor on and off from inside the shop, but have the air compressor outside the shop. So I've wired up a switch inside here that is going to turn on one outlet. And then I can turn it on and off whenever I want to run the compressor. I have also added more outlets on the outside of the new wall of my shop so that I have more options in the rest of the garage for plugging things in. I added an additional 30 amp circuit for a mini split that I plan to add hopefully soon. Once all the boxes were wired, I called up my electrician friend and had him come over to help me do the scary part. I'm good with wiring 15 amp, 20 amp, even 30 amp circuits, but when it comes to pulling 100 amps from the main panel to my sub panel to give it power, I figured I should make sure I get this done right. So my friend and his brother came over and had the main line all hooked up and ready to go after 2 evenings of working on it. Then we turned on that main line and magically there was 100 amps of power. Now that there was power in the box, I was able to wire and hook up all the circuit breakers and then make it look pretty. When you do this, make sure that you label which wire comes from which circuit so that you're not guessing later. The final test of my system was to turn it all on and make sure I didn't blow anything up or make any dumb mistakes. We turned on the 100 amps and brought that power to the sub panel, and then I turned on each circuit individually and tested the outlets on that circuit to make sure they were wired correctly and they had power flowing to them. And it turns out that I'm not a half bad fake electrician. I also had a company called Hyperlight recently reach out and offer to send me some LED neon signs. This was actually pretty cool because they'll take a design that you send them and make it into a lighted sign. I just sent them the words and the font that I wanted, and they got back to me the next day with the design. It's all LED lights and it's controlled by a remote that I can use to change whatever color I want. So far, it seems like a quality product and it'll be a fun addition to the shop. All right, so I think I'm gonna put this right up here for now. Probably have a different home later, but that's good for now. There we go. That is cool. That's pretty sweet. Next up in the new shop build is to plan and install the lighting. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already so you can get all the updates on the new shop. Now, go build something and we'll see you next time.